In America's prisons and on its streets, a hidden world exists. This is a world where survival means everything. But this very survival instinct made some people so powerful that they took control not only of their surroundings, but also of others. In some way, they might even be controlling yours. Join us as we take a closer look at the stories behind some of the most dangerous prison gangs in the U.S. The Mexican Mafia, or La M, isn't just a prison gang. It's one of the deadliest and most powerful criminal organizations in the United States. It operates deep inside the prison system, but extends far beyond, controlling street gangs and criminal enterprises across the country. The Mexican Mafia. From its name, one would guess it is based in Mexico, but no. It has no origins in that country and is entirely a U.S. prison-based organization. It started in 1957 within the walls of Duell Vocational Institution, a California Youth Authority facility. 13 Hispanic gang members from different Los Angeles neighborhoods came together, not for money or power, at least not at first, but for survival. They were outnumbered and they needed protection. They were vulnerable to attacks from other prison gangs. What began as a simple alliance quickly turned into something much more sinister. Prison officials tried to break them apart, transferring members to different facilities, thinking they could crush La M before it grew. But they had no idea what they had just set in motion. Instead of weakening the gang, they spread it like a wildfire. Soon, La M was no longer just a group of inmates trying to survive. It was becoming an empire. Today, the U.S. government considers it to be among the most powerful, dangerous, and feared criminal organizations in the world. There's only one way into La M and only one way out. The rule is simple: blood in, blood out. If you want to join it, you have to kill. If you try to leave, you die. The number 13 is deeply symbolic for this gang. It represents the letter M, the 13th letter of the alphabet, which stands for Mexican Mafia. Some also say that it symbolizes the number of original Hispanic gang members who founded this organization. Thus, members of the Mafia are marked by the number 13, and they show loyalty through a black handprint tattoo, Mexican flag imagery, or Aztec symbols. But symbols don't tell the full story, power does, and La M has plenty of it. Inside prison, the gang calls the shots. Outside, they control the streets. Their influence stretches over nearly every Hispanic gang in Southern California. This includes the MS-13, who follow their rules and pay taxes for their protection inside the prisons. La M dictates who can sell drugs, who gets taxed, and who lives or dies. And despite being a Hispanic gang, they've even struck deals with the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist group, to carry out contract killings. On the other hand, they remain locked in a deadly war with several gangs, like the Norteños, Black Guerrilla Family, and DC Blacks. The rules of this organization are strict. Loyalty is everything, and snitches, cowards, or those who break the code are dealt with swiftly. Members must show respect to each other and their families, never steal, and never start conflicts without approval. But above all, revenge is non-negotiable. If someone crosses La M, payback is guaranteed, no matter how long it takes. In this world, the gang comes first, even before family, religion, or God. Homosexuality is strictly banned, but check the hypocrisy. The gang profits heavily from forced prostitution inside prison. In places like Highland Park, Los Angeles, gang members follow orders straight from La M's leadership, murdering anyone who dares to challenge their rules. The bloodshed started early. In 1958, La M members committed their first prison guard murder at San Quentin. By 1971, they had moved beyond prison walls. Their first sanctioned hit on the outside was brutal. Alfonso Pachi Alvarez was shot twice in the head in Monterey Park for one reason. He was taking a cut from drug dealers without kicking up his profits to the gang's leaders behind bars. The man who pulled the trigger was Joe Pegleg Morgan, a white gangster who climbed to the top of La M's ranks. Interestingly, he was not a Mexican. Over the decades, La M's influence has only grown. In 2011, members of the Azusa 13 gang, acting under orders from La M, were indicted for a reign of terror against black residents in Southern California, harassing, intimidating, and even killing them in an effort to drive them out. In 2022, a brutal fight between La M and MS-13 inside a Texas federal prison left 2 inmates dead, forcing a nationwide federal prison lockdown over fears of more violence. And in 2023, the FBI and LAPD cracked down on the gang's activities, arresting 12 members and seizing an arsenal of drugs and weapons.
Well, several high-ranking members of the Mexican mafia are in custody after an operation with the FBI and the LAPD. They also seized firearms and narcotics.
Despite these crackdowns, La M remains as powerful as ever. They don't just run the prisons, they run entire neighborhoods, controlling everything from drug trafficking to murder for hire. Even Hollywood has taken notice and has featured La M in the film American Me. The Aryan Brotherhood, also known as the Brand, is the oldest, largest, and deadliest prison gang in the United States. It is a brutal brotherhood of killers, drug lords, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists who rule with an iron fist. With only a few thousand members, they are vastly outnumbered in the prison system, yet they control a staggering amount of the violence. Their motto is blood in, blood out. To join, you must spill blood for the gang. The only way out is in a body bag. The Aryan Brotherhood, born inside the hellish walls of San Quentin State Prison in the 1960s, originated as a white inmate protection group. But survival turned into power, and power turned into a criminal empire. They carved shamrocks, swastikas, and lightning bolts into their skin as a mark of allegiance, sending a clear message. They feared nothing and no one. They have turned prisons into hunting grounds. In 1983, members Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain brutally stabbed two prison guards, Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman, in a cold, calculated attack. Decades later, in 2015, gang leader Ronald Yandel ordered a hit on an inmate at California State Prison, Sacramento, promising the killers full membership if they succeeded. It was the same brutal logic that played out in 2018 when AB member Brady Corbett murdered a fellow inmate for lying about his affiliation and failing to pay a drug debt. Both offenses punishable by death. The government has tried to wipe them out.
The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas divided their territory into 5 regions, run very systematically in almost a military-type structure. As I talked about, there were generals and majors, sergeants at arms, and they went through, and you can see on the chart we have here today some of that structure.
In 2002, federal agents launched a massive takedown, arresting 29 top Aryan Brotherhood leaders and charging them under RICO laws, the same ones used to bring down the mafia. Prosecutors pushed for 21 death sentences, hoping to cut the snake's head off, but the Brand is a hydra. Cut off one head and another takes its place. 30 convictions followed, yet none of the gang's most powerful leaders were executed. In 2019, 16 members were charged with murder, racketeering, and drug trafficking. In 2020, authorities launched a massive raid, seizing 80 pounds of meth, 5 pounds of heroin, and 25 firearms across multiple states. Their web of crime stretches from California to Alabama, proving that even in the 21st century, the Brand is as dangerous as ever. And then there's Umbrella Man, a suspected Aryan Brotherhood associate who authorities believe lit the first fire during the George Floyd protests, sparking chaos in Minneapolis. To this day, he has never been charged. Even federal investigations like a 2024 Department of Justice crackdown only scratched the surface, exposing members who orchestrated killings and ran drug operations from their cells.
Tonight, evidence that leaders of a racist gang with a record of extreme violence is directing street drug operations from inside their cells.
The Southern Poverty Law Center calls them one of the most violent prison gangs in America, and it's not hard to see why. The Gangster Disciple Nation is more than a street gang. It's a brutal crime syndicate, a kingdom of violence and power struggles. Born out of 2 former rivals, David Barksdale and Larry Hoover, the gang began in 1968 as the Black Gangster Disciple Nation on Chicago's deadly streets. But as with all alliances founded on power, it didn't last. Hoover's Gangster Disciples and Barksdale's Black Disciples ultimately broke apart, each establishing their own reign of terror. From army bases to jail cells, from crack houses to mortuaries, the GD Nation has spread its influence through violence and bloodshed. Their influence extended even to a United States military installation in Germany in 2005, where the Air Force Airman Rico Williams orchestrated a merciless 6-minute initiation gang beating on Sergeant Juwan Johnson. Johnson pleaded for treatment. Williams dictated otherwise. He succumbed to his wounds on the same evening. When the government clamped down, Williams received 22 years in prison, but the Gangster Disciples' hold did not loosen. In 2020, the GDN turned a funeral into a battleground in Chicago. 2 gang members affiliated with the Gangster Disciples burst into a funeral parlor, firing at least 60 shots into the crowd. 15 were struck, a brutal echo of an intensifying blood feud within their own ranks. The feds have attempted time and again to break the Gangster Disciples. In 2016, 32 members were taken into custody on a sweeping RICO case and charged with 10 murders, extortion, selling narcotics, and even recruiting rap artists into the gang. On that list was a retired Atlanta police officer who was moonlighting as a gang hitman. Prison bars don't curb the GDs. In 2021, 7 more members were charged in a leadership dispute that left 2 men dead, including a brutal gang execution in Missouri. The Latin Kings, one of the most notorious and structured prison gangs in the world, were born in the heart of Chicago in 1954. The gang was forged by Puerto Rican immigrants who were searching for identity and power. They built a brotherhood in a world that often felt hostile to them. What started as a means of unity quickly transformed into a vast criminal empire stretching across the U.S. and beyond. Today, the Latin Kings operate under 2 major factions: the King Motherland Chicago KMC faction, ruling from its stronghold in Chicago, and the Bloodline faction, which emerged in New York. With tens of thousands of members, their reach extends into dozens of states and deep into the prison system. Their signature colors, black and gold, mark their presence, while crowns, lions, and coded symbols tell the story of loyalty, discipline, and violence. More than just a gang, the Latin Kings function as an organized society, enforcing strict rules and punishments. Violations range from losing rank and being subjected to brutal beatings, and in the most extreme cases, death on sight. L.A. Kaufman wrote in the February 2015 issue of New York Magazine that the Kings had a unique mixture of intense discipline, revolutionary politics, and a homemade religion called Kingism. Their manifesto describes a transformation from reckless youth to an enlightened new king, who sees beyond gang wars to a larger struggle against social oppression. As one member put it, the manifesto is considered our Bible, and reading it is to go from the darkness to the light. Despite its rhetoric, the gang remains deeply entrenched in crime. Drug trafficking, murder, extortion, and money laundering fuel their empire. Their influence extends beyond men. Women, known as Latin Queens, play their own role in the organization, advocating self-empowerment while still enforcing gang loyalty. Then comes the Mongols Motorcycle Club, which isn't just another biker gang. It's a brotherhood forged in war, rebellion, and the open road. The club began when 10 battle-hardened Vietnam veterans searched for purpose in the U.S., a country that had turned its back on them. Their first president, Louis Costello, named them after one of history's most feared conquerors, Genghis Khan, and set the tone for the outlaw legacy they would carve out in the decades to come. By 2000, the Mongols had grown into a formidable force with 21 chapters across the United States. 2 decades later, they had spread like wildfire, establishing a presence in multiple countries. Their emblem, a Mongol warrior with a top knot, sunglasses, and bell-bottoms, is a symbol of defiance, a brand so notorious that it's officially trademarked. They even have a fight song. Law enforcement ranks them among the Big 5 outlaw motorcycle clubs in the U.S. In Australia, they are one of the Big 6, feared and respected in equal measure. But the Mongols' reputation is built on more than just their numbers. Their history is steeped in crime, drug trafficking, extortion, murder, and weapons violations. Meth runs, brutal beatings, and bloody turf wars have defined their path. The club insists it has cleaned up its act, but law enforcement sees things differently. In March 2024, that reputation took another dark turn when a San Bernardino County Sheriff Deputy, Christopher Bingham, was arrested for allegedly being a full-fledged Mongol. A firearms expert and former gun shop owner, he was caught riding alongside club members with an unregistered Glock 9mm tucked away. His shirt screamed defiance, expletive the 81, a direct shot at the Mongols' bitter rivals, the Hells Angels. On his hand, a black M ring, a silent pledge of loyalty to the club. Whether they see themselves as outlaws, warriors, or simply men who live by their own rules, one thing is certain. The Mongols aren't just a motorcycle club. They're an empire of the road, built on speed, brotherhood, and the ever-present shadow of violence. The Barrio Azteca, also known as Los Aztecas, is a ruthless criminal gang that grew from the violent prison yards of El Paso, Texas in 1986. What began as a close-knit group for survival inside the walls quickly mutated into a multinational crime syndicate with thousands of members operating on both sides of the US-Mexico border. Today, this group is one of the deadliest in America, boasting at least 3,000 members in the US and as many as 5,000 in Ciudad Juarez, a city drenched in cartel bloodshed. By 2008, Barrio Azteca decided to wage war against the Sinaloa cartel, a drug trafficking syndicate that sought to seize control of the lucrative smuggling routes. To win the war, the Barrio Azteca formed a lethal alliance with La Linea, the muscle of the Juarez cartel. The stakes were unimaginably high. According to the DEA, about 70% of the cocaine flooding across the U.S. border came from the Juarez crossing. The gang's business extended beyond trafficking. They ruled the streets and prisons alike, dealing drugs behind bars and ensuring their influence stretched from the borderlands to deep within Mexico. Barrio Azteca wasn't just another cartel pawn. They were assassins, enforcers, and executioners, uniquely positioned because most of them held U.S. citizenship. That meant they could slip across the border with ease, carrying out brutal killings with terrifying efficiency. The bloodshed spilled into the prisons in a way that would shock even seasoned cartel watchers. On March 5, 2009, chaos erupted inside a Ciudad Juarez prison, igniting a massacre that left 20 inmates dead and 7 others injured. As thick black smoke billowed into the sky, desperate family members gathered outside, helplessly waiting for news. Inside, an all-out war had broken out. Members of Barrio Azteca, armed with makeshift weapons, turned the prison into a slaughterhouse, setting mattresses on fire and throwing bodies from second-story windows. They overpowered guards, forced them to release 150 of their own men, and then stormed the high-security wing, where their rivals, Los Mesicles and Artistas Asesinos, were held. What followed was merciless. Men were stabbed, beaten, and executed with homemade weapons. It took guards, police, and the Mexican army more than 3 hours to regain control, but by then, the damage had been done. The carnage didn't end there. Just 2 years later, on July 26, 2011, another nightmarish bloodbath unfolded inside the same prison. Barrio Azteca members stormed through the facility, targeting Los Mesicles again. This time, 17 prisoners were executed and 20 more were left bleeding on the cold concrete floors. Security footage captured the sheer horror. 2 gunmen methodically clearing hallways of guards, opening doors to let in more killers. With terrifying precision, they hunted their victims, showing no mercy. The massacre was no mere gang fight. It was a cold, calculated execution. Guards stood by, seemingly powerless, or perhaps complicit. It was a chilling display of how deeply corruption had rotted the system. The overcrowded prison, designed to hold 850 but packed with over 2,700 inmates, had become a killing field. The gang's violence wasn't confined to prison walls. On January 31, 2010, a quiet working-class neighborhood in Ciudad Juarez became the site of another mass killing that sent shockwaves across Mexico. A party was underway in Villas de Salvarcar, teenagers laughing, watching a soccer game when the night turned to horror. 7 vehicles rolled up, windows blacked out, engines humming with deadly intent. Gunmen poured out, sealing off the street, cutting off any chance of escape. Then, without warning, they stormed the house and opened fire. Some teens never made it past the front door, gunned down as they ran. Others collapsed in neighboring homes, trying to crawl to safety. 16 young lives were snuffed out in minutes, their families left to grieve in the flickering glow of candlelit vigils. Authorities scrambled for answers, but none made sense. These weren't cartel members, they were kids, good students with no ties to the drug trade. Yet the brutality had all the marks of the cartel war that had turned Ciudad Juarez into a battleground. Then came the attack that stunned the world. March 26, 2010, a broad daylight assassination that shattered the illusion that U.S. officials were untouchable. A pregnant U.S. consulate worker and her husband were driving through Ciudad Juarez when gunmen opened fire, killing them instantly. Miraculously, their baby was spared. Not long after, another consulate worker's husband was ambushed and murdered while his children were wounded in the chaos. The attack sent shockwaves through Washington, as American officials had been gunned down on foreign soil. The group had become more than just a gang. They were now an international menace, capable of striking high-profile targets with deadly precision. In the aftermath, the U.S. State Department evacuated personnel from consulates across northern Mexico, fearing more bloodshed. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, cartel leader Arturo Gallegos Castrillon, known as El Farmero, had reportedly ordered the killings, believing the victims had granted visas to rival gang members. Whether it was revenge, a mistaken identity, or a chilling message to the U.S. government, one thing was clear. Barrio Azteca wasn't just fighting for control of the drug trade, they were waging war. Even as time passed, the violence never truly stopped. In October 2010, Barrio Azteca conducted another massacre. This time, they targeted a child's birthday party. Gunmen stormed a home in Ciudad Juarez, unleashing more than 70 bullets, killing 14 people and wounding over 20 others. Witnesses described the attackers as young men, barely more than teenagers themselves, blocking traffic to ensure their escape. Authorities hesitated to label it cartel violence, but the brutality was undeniable. The chilling resemblance to the Villas de Salvarcar massacre earlier that year left no doubt. Barrio Azteca and its rivals were engaged in an all-out war, with innocent lives caught in the crossfire. The Black Guerrilla family was born from anger, from desperation, from a burning desire to tear down a system that had caged black men for centuries. It started in the walls of San Quentin, where George Jackson, a radical thinker and revolutionary, took inspiration from figures like Marcus Garvey and Karl Marx. The BGF wasn't just about protection. It was about power, resistance, and a vision of revolution that extended far beyond prison walls. But revolutions are messy, and loyalty in a world like this is a fragile thing. Faye Stender knew that better than anyone. She was a lawyer who fought for the rights of George Jackson and other incarcerated black revolutionaries. She believed in the cause, risked everything for it. But when Jackson was killed in 1971, the movement began to shift. Some believed she had turned her back on them. And the BGF doesn't forget betrayal. In 1979, Edward Glenn Brooks, a BGF member fresh out of prison, tracked her down. What happened next was the stuff of nightmares. He forced her to confess her supposed sins at gunpoint. I, Faye Stender, admit I betrayed George Jackson and the prison movement when they needed me most. Then, 5 gunshots were fired. She survived, but barely. Paralyzed and in an unbearable pain, she fled to Hong Kong, as far from the BGF as she could get. But there was no outrunning what had happened. Not long after, the weight of it all became too much. She took her own life. The BGF has even killed Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party and a key figure in the Black Power movement. But this gang is not about violence only. In 2015, Baltimore erupted in protest after the death of Freddie Gray. Buildings burned, anger surged, and then came the rumors. The Black Guerrilla family, the Bloods, and the Crips had called a truce, not to stop the chaos, but to target police.
Baltimore remains on edge tonight, 1 week after the death of Freddie Gray, the young man who died while in police custody. Late yesterday, police in riot gear clashed with protesters after some demonstrators smashed windows on stores and police cars. NBC's Ron Mott has the latest.
But then, something unexpected happened. Gang leaders stepped forward, not to declare war, but to calm the storm. They released a statement calling for peace. In some parts of the city, BGF members and rival gangsters stood together, not fighting the police, but protecting black-owned businesses, shielding children, even helping reporters navigate the chaos. The streets had their own code, their own lines of justice. Some were spared, others weren't. The Vice Lords are the second largest street gang in Chicago, with an estimated 20,000 members just within Illinois alone. It began in 1958 when a group of young black men came together in Chicago. They had spent time at the Illinois Training School for Boys in St. Charles, and knew survival meant more than just looking out for themselves. They came together for security, strength, and the chance to shape their own future on the streets. Over the years, the gang has grown into one of Chicago's most structured and long-standing criminal organizations. Their influence has spread far beyond the city, reaching 28 states and drawing in nearly 35,000 members and associates. In spite of the splintering of the different Vice Lord sets, each with its own hierarchy and chain of command, there is one common denominator that ties them all together: power. Although recent efforts to consolidate the organization into one ruling body have collapsed, the Vice Lords have only continued to grow more calculating, more structured, and more deadly. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, is a violent street gang that originated in Los Angeles and has deep ties to El Salvador. In April 2017, the gang was implicated in the brutal murders of 4 young men in central Islip, Long Island, New York. The victims were lured into a park and attacked with machetes, knives, and wooden clubs, resulting in their mutilated bodies being discovered the following day. These killings drew national attention, prompting President Trump to denounce MS-13 as bad, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions to vow to devastate the gang.
It's essential that Congress fund another 10,000 ICE officers, we're asking for that, so that we can eliminate MS-13 and root out the criminal cartels from our country. Now, we're getting them out anyway, but we'd like to get them out a lot faster.
Both officials linked the gang's activities to previous immigration policies. In response to the escalating violence, the Department of Justice, under Sessions' direction, designated MS-13 as a priority for the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Forces in October 2017. This move aimed to intensify efforts to dismantle the gang's operations across the United States. But MS-13's story started long before any modern president took office. The gang took shape in the 1980s. It was formed by immigrants who had fled the long and bloody civil war in El Salvador. Others came from Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, all of them drawn together by the need to survive in a hostile new world. The name itself, Mara Salvatrucha, is a mix of words meaning gang, Salvadoran, and street smart. The number 13 ties them to the powerful Mexican mafia. From the start, MS-13 was different. They were savages. Unlike other gangs that relied on guns, MS-13 became infamous for butchering their enemies with machetes. They spread fear wherever they went, carving out their place in neighborhoods already dominated by powerful Mexican gangs. Before long, their reach extended far beyond Los Angeles. Today, according to the FBI, MS-13 has established a presence in 46 states. In 2012, the U.S. Treasury labeled MS-13 a transnational criminal organization. It was the first street gang to ever receive that designation. Getting into MS-13 isn't easy. It requires pain. New recruits are beaten senseless for straight 13 seconds, a ritual known as being jumped in. Then comes the real test, getting wet, which means committing a violent crime, often murder, to prove their loyalty. But leaving it is nearly impossible. Massive tattoos across their chests mark them for life. And some MS-13 factions have a strict rule. If you try to get out, you die. By 2008, the FBI estimated MS-13 had between 6,000 and 10,000 members in the U.S., making it one of the largest criminal organizations in the country. But the real danger isn't inside America. It's what happened when the gang was deported. In the late 1990s, authorities cracked down, shipping hundreds of members back to Central America. Instead of dying out, MS-13 flourished. Today, its numbers in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala are believed to be at least 60,000. Their operations bring in around $31.2 million a year, money made mostly from drugs and extortion. In New York, 2 high school girls were slaughtered with a machete and a baseball bat in what police described as a revenge killing over a minor dispute. 4 suspected gang members were arrested. In Houston, 2 alleged M13 members, Miguel Alvarez Flores, 22, and Diego Hernandez Rivera, 18, kidnapped 3 teenage girls. They were held hostage, assaulted, and when the gang was done with them, one was dragged to the side of the road and shot dead. In court, the accused laughed and waved at the cameras. The gang operates under one chilling motto: kill, rape, control. The phrase is by an FBI gang specialist who spent years investigating MS-13. Trump and Sessions blame Obama for the gang's rise, claiming his immigration policies allowed MS-13 to thrive. But MS-13 was already a national menace long before he took office. By the 1990s, law enforcement had already identified the gang as a growing threat. The FBI formed a task force against MS-13 in 1994, years before Obama even entered politics. According to Fulton T. Armstrong, a researcher at the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies, the real explosion of MS-13 happened under Bush and Cheney, when mass incarceration packed prisons, rehabilitation programs were slashed, and conditions in Central America worsened. I have seen no evidence that the Obama administration can be blamed in any way for the existence or activities of the gang in the U.S., said Yohan Grillo, an expert on gang crime. In fact, Obama's administration aggressively targeted gang members, prioritizing their deportation. Despite the political finger-pointing, fact-checkers rated Trump's claim as false. But the reality remains. MS-13 is a force of chaos and violence, stretching from American suburbs to the lawless streets of Central America. And no matter who's in office, the gang shows no signs of slowing down.